Okay, we are in the middle of Perek Mem Aleph. We are on page 112 on the top, 208 at the bottom. Okay. 2, 4, 6, 8 lines in the bottom of the page. In Perek Mem Aleph, what we learned last week, the Alter Rebbe is explaining why fear, yira, is the most important thing. Reishis Aveda, and he says it's not enough to awaken love, because Hashem wants the concept of bittul, of humility. Humility is not by a son or daughter, a child, it's by an eved. Because when you have fear and awe, again, that fear is going to hit you. Awe means you're accepting Hashem as king, and Hashem is standing over you and watching everything that you're doing, and there's not the thing. So he says, like before you do a mitzvah, you think that I'm connecting myself to Hashem, I'm becoming completely subservient and bottled and nullified to Hashem. And he explained by tefillin is the mind and the heart, and talis is encompassing levels and so on. So he says now like this. Even though a person will try to awaken this open fear and awe of Hashem, and it doesn't happen. Like a love, remember we learned, and ideally you're supposed to awaken a burning love of Hashem to do Torah mitzvahs. What happens if you can't do it? You're not there. Same thing with you. What happens if you can't awaken this awe of Hashem? Mikoma can nevertheless, don't worry about it, he says. Basically, you're accepting the yoke of heaven. You're accepting the yoke of Hashem. And you're bringing down the awe of Hashem, at least in your mind. Maybe you don't feel it so much in the heart, but you're doing it with the thought and the will of the mind. The Kabbalah, and this acceptance of the yoke is not fake, it's not bluff, you really mean it. It's just not awakening you enough to have this actual, tangible fear and awe of Hashem. The Kabbalah, and this acceptance of God's sovereignty is, amit is true, Balishim Suffolk, without any doubt. Why is it true? He says, Shayitevin the Fashas Kol Yisrael, because the nature of every single Jew is not to rebel against Hashem. So he says like this: if a person, ideally, before you daven, before you do a mitzvah, you're supposed to try to awaken a tangible, sensational fear of Hashem, in a way that you could see the awesomeness. Said, even if not, don't worry about it. Because the bottom line is, you did accept the yoke of Hashem, intellectually, in your thought. And it's real. Why is it real? It's not put on. Because the nature of every Jew is to fear Hashem. Every Jew innately has a love of Hashem and a fear of Hashem. Ideally, you're supposed to awaken it in that the body feels it. But even if not, if it's just your mind feeling it, it's also enough. It's real. It's not ideal, but it's not fake. It's not bluff, because it's real. Because therefore, when you learn Torah because of this awe of Hashem, or a mitzvah sha'esa, or any mitzvah you do, machmas kabbalah zu, because of this acceptance of the fear of Hashem, umachmas hamshachas hayira, and because if you're bringing down this fear of Hashem, even in your mind, it's you're not getting to feel it in the heart, but you're feeling it in the head. Nikras b'shem aveda shlema. It is called a complete fear of Hashem. Chol avedas eved ladeinu malka. Like a king, a servant is fear for the king. Do they have this open fear and awe of the king? Not necessarily. When a servant serves the king or his master, there is an awe of the king. But it's not always a felt one, a sensed one. It's not sensational by him. It's in his mind. The Rebbe says it's good enough. It's good enough to be called Eved of Hashem. And now I'm going to explain before we learn further. Okay. Now I'm sorry. Let me just a few more lines. Mashenke im leimet umekayim mitzvah ba'ava levada. If what happens instead of having fear, you only love Hashem, and because I love Hashem, I want to do a mitzvah, not because I have awe of Him. He says, "Einen nikras b'shem avedas ha'eved." It's not called the aveda of an eved, because if I love somebody, that's me loving. Bittul, yira, fear, and awe means basically I don't exist in the presence of the king. I don't exist. There's only the king there. Like we learned last week, you make a slight movement in the presence of the king could kill you. It's called rebellion against the king. Dr. Rebbe says like this. The whole Mem Dr. Rebbe is explaining, love is important. I'm going to explain something outside first. We'll see it inside. Love is very important, but it doesn't come to the level of fear. Therefore, it says, Reishis Chachma Yiras Hashem. Let me explain it as follows. We say in davening, especially Rosh Hashanah and Kippur time, the Sefer Mei Tshuva, Avinu Malkeinu. Avinu Malkeinu. We say in davening every day in Tachton, Avinu Malkeinu. If you think about it, Avinu and Malkeinu are contradictory. A father cannot be a king, and a king cannot be a father. Meaning, the definition of a king, Chassidus explains, is when foreigners subjugate themselves to the king. Like we say in davening, in Ma'ariv, Umalchusay v'rotzain kiblu aleihim. Hashem's sovereignty, willingly they accepted upon themselves. There's a dictator, by the way, Moshe. A dictator you don't accept willingly. If you accept him willingly, he's not a dictator. The definition of a Moshe in Lashon Kodesh and in English also. Dictator means whether you like it or not, he's going to tell you what to do. You didn't accept him as a king. Melech means you accept him as a king. The definition of a king, Chassidus explains, the Medrash says, Ein melech v'lo am. You can't have a king if there's no nation. What does a nation mean? A nation means people that are not the king, foreigners, who subjugate themselves to the king. A child is not a foreigner. A child is an extension of the parent. David HaMelech says in Tehillim, Tachas avisecha yil benacha. In the place of the father is the child. B'ra, the Zohar has an expression, B'ra karu davua. The child is the knee of the father. A child is an extension of the parent. So therefore, a child, the father is not a king to the child because he's not a foreigner that subjugates himself. From the opposite side, there's somebody called an Eved. An Eved is not an Eved. A child is not an Eved to his father or mother. Slave means there's a foreigner who's telling you what to do and you do it. A parent is you. So if you think about it, Avinu and Balkeinu are contradictory. And yet we say Avinu Malkeinu. What's the difference between? So Chassidus explains it, and Alter Rebbe is saying it here also. Avinu is like a child serves the parents with love. Yeah, there's a mitzvah, ish imei v'avotiro. You have to have awe and fear of the parents. But primarily, he's not a slave. If they're normal parents, the child is not a slave. A slave is not a child. So how does a child serve Hashem? Banim atem lashem alokechem. That's with love. That's avinu. Malkeinu is the level of fear, like we just explained. I'll try to explain. Yira is fear and awe. That's an eved to a melech. You don't love the king. You fear the king. You don't fear a parent as much as you love the parent. It's two different things. You have Avinu Malkeinu. So Chassidus explains they're not really contradictory because they're two different Avedas that a Jew has. There's an Aveda of a Jew loving Hashem, and there's an Aveda of a Jew fearing Hashem. It's two different things. In other places in Chassidus it says, what level is Banim Atam Lashem Alokechem of the Jew? The neshama of the Jew. In fact, in Parak Beis of Tanya, the second chapter of Tanya, when the Alter Rebbe explains the origin of the neshamas, and he says, just like the child comes from the seed of the father, the neshamas come from Hashem, and Alter Rebbe calls the pasuk, Banim Atem Lashem Alokechem. You are God's children. So the neshama of a Jew is primarily the banim, the child. That's the level of Avas Hashem. The eved of the Jew, Malkeinu, that is primarily the body. The body is the neshama is a part of Hashem. The neshama doesn't have to subjugate itself to Hashem. It's part of Hashem. What needs to subjugate itself to Hashem as an eved? The body. What's the definition of an eved? A normal eved. There's two types of eved, and I'll explain that also. It's very important. There's two types of eved. Chassidus explains in Samach Vav, the Rebbe Rashab elaborates on this a lot. There's two types of eved in Chassidus that Chassidus talks about, because we're avodim to Hashem. Kili b'nei Yisrael avodim. The pasuk says, "O Chumash, countless times, you are my slaves," and Hashem calls us children. Okay, so he explained the neshama, which is a part of Hashem, that's the child. The body, which is not necessarily wanting to do what Hashem wants, so that's a level of an eved. But you have two types of an eved. In Chassidic language, it's called eved pashut, regular simple eved. And then you have Eved Neman. Eved Neman means a trusted Eved. Like it says by Moshe Rabbeinu, when in last week's Parsha, when Miriam and Aaron were making fun of, speaking bad about Moshe, Hashem said, Ki b'chol beisi ne'emanhu. He's an Eved Neman. What's the difference? Eved Pashut, a simple Eved, means as follows. I really have my own will. I don't want to do what the master wants. I have my own desires. But I'm an Eved. So I give up my will for what the master wants. That's called an Eved, a slave. What is a slave? A slave really wants to do something else. And he gives up his will for the sake of the master. A Jew the body wants to do not necessarily Torah mitzvahs. It gives itself up to Hashem to do Torah mitzvahs. But then there's a deeper level of an Eved. The Eved is so connected with the master and is so one with the master. What the master wants, he wants. It's not that I have my own will and I'm giving up my will for the master. That's the lower level of an Eved. Eved Pashut. Eved, simple Eved means I really have my own wills. Or like, I'll give you an example in modern day language, boss and worker. Yeah? A worker knows he has to do what the boss wants. If not, he's fired. So it's not it doesn't mean that the worker really wants to do what the boss wants. I really would rather not. He's the boss. He told me to do it. I got no choice. I got to do it. Eved Neman is said by Moshe Rabbeinu, by Rebbes and things like that. Eved Neman means that he is so connected and bound to the master. What the master wants is what he wants. There's no will of his own. The Alter Rebbe is saying over here, the ultimate avodah of a Jew is really Eved. Because Eved means you are subservient, you are non-existent entity. And Chassidus even gives a halachic proof of this, so to speak. The Gemara says, Yad Eved, the hand of a slave, is like the hand of his master. Which means, if the slave finds something in the street, it doesn't belong to him, it belongs to the master. He's an extension of the master. By a child, it's not necessarily like that. He supports him, otherwise not, whatever. So Halacha says, the Rishonim say this, if, let's say he finds a lost article in the street. The slave finds a lost article in the street. So Halacha says it belongs to the master. So the Rishonim right, the codify is right, it doesn't mean that the Eved, the slave, acquires it. And now it goes to the master. No. When the slave picks it up, it goes straight to the master. There is no Eved. It's a non-existent entity. It is an extension of the master, but not like a child, which is a part of the master. It's an extension of the master. And Hashem wants that level of an avodah, because if I serve Hashem out of love, which is very important, by the way, but the Alter Rebbe says the primary way of serving Hashem is with fear, because when I do it out of fear, I am non-existent. The only existence that exists is Hashem. When I do something out of love, it doesn't mean I'm subservient to the master. On the contrary, if I love you and I will do something for you, there's a me that loves. And therefore, when I do something to somebody I love, I feel good. There's a me, Dr. Rebbe uses the expression, a tzaddik gomer, who has the highest level possible of love of Hashem. Dr. Rebbe says in Tanya, yesh mi shahoyed. There's somebody who is loving. So yes, Av is important because Av is an attachment to Hashem. Av is a closeness with Hashem. But it's not the level of year. Now let's see it inside. Okay, the top line of 210. If your guy only serves Hashem with love, to cling to Hashem, it's not called Avedis Eved. It's not an Eved because he loves it. He's not subservient. And the Torah says, Va'avaditem es Hashem Elokeichem. Torah says, Avodah, Eved. You have to be an Eved of Hashem. Or Eisis Avodah. And the Zohar explains, what does that mean? A Jew has to be kahai Torah, like an ox. The Yahiven lay Misa, that they put a yoke in order, and it the first place is a yoke. Began in order lapaka mine tov la'alma, that good should come to the world. If you want an ox to function, to plow, you have to put a yoke on it. First, you put a yoke on it. Yoke, Eved, and then something good comes up from it. Then you're able to plow and do things that it needs to do. The high lo yishtakach gabei, and then it says, if this one doesn't have submission found in him, lo yishtakach gabei lo yishare bei kedusha, God cannot rest on you. And he says, Shekol Adam, every person. Tzarich shtei bechinus madregas. Every Jew needs to have these two levels. A level of Eved or bechinus ben. Each one has an advantage. Therefore, one is the right wing, one is the left wing. But which one of the two is more important? Which one comes first? It's subservience, submission, eved. And he says, Av sheyesh ben shugamkin eved. Even though you can have a son that could also be subservient to the master. I'll explain it. Let me say it now already. You know, there are chassidim of a Rebbe, and there's children of a Rebbe. Children of a Rebbe are an extension of the Rebbe. Chassidim are servants of the Rebbe. The previous Rebbe said, because he was a son and a chassid, he said, I have an advantage over all the chassidim. All of the chassidim are chassidim. I am a son and a chassid. I have both advantages. I'm a ben and an eved. And both things need to be. And he says, why? But you still can come to the ultimate level of loving Hashem without first having awe and fear, as it's known to the Kabbalists. Meaning like this, love itself is a selfish type of a thing, really. I love you, I want to attach myself to you, and how do I do it? By connecting to you, by doing things for you. You can't come to a real Ava that you don't exist. It's only I love Hashem and no, not me. Remember we mentioned, last week, 2 weeks, I remember we mentioned it. Rabbi Manas Film used to tell that to people, but it's well known already. Everybody says it. Somebody comes along and says, oh, I love chicken. I love chicken. So you say to them, is that what you do to somebody you love? You kill it and clean it and then you bake it? Is that what you're going to do? Can you imagine? I love my kids, but I'm going to kill them first and bake them and eat them. I mean, you don't love chicken. If you would love chicken, you wouldn't kill it. What do you mean you love chicken? You love yourself. Chicken tastes good to me, so I love chicken. But you don't love chicken. You love me. Ava could be a dangerous thing. Ava is when you become one with the person. But the ultimate level of Ava is the essence of the person. No feelings. I mentioned in the past, it's, Gimel Tammuz time, Yud-Beis Tammuz time with the Frierdiker Rebbe. The story, I believe we mentioned in one of the classes a while ago. The Rebbe Rashab, Frierdiker Rebbe's father, was learning Chassidus with a chassid. And the previous Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe, was a baby in the crib. And when they were walking out of the room, the Frierdiker Rebbe was in his crib sleeping. And he was a very handsome baby. So the chassid said to the Rebbe Rashab, wow, it's such it's such a beautiful baby. So the Rebbe Rashab says, later he told the story, and he said, I wanted to give him a kiss. He wanted to give the baby a kiss. But he didn't. He went out and he wrote a Chassidic discourse. And when the previous Rebbe got older, the Rebbe Rashab, his father, gave the Frierdiker Rebbe the Maimed, the discourse, and he said to him, this is a Chassidic kiss. And the Rebbe explains what does that story, our Rebbe explains what does the story mean. And he explained very simple. When it comes to Matan Torah, Hashem said Anechi. So we learned already. Anechi is an acronym the Gemara says, Ana Nafshi Ksavis Yavis. Simply means I myself wrote it and gave it. Okay? Now, the Rebbe defined it according to Chassidus in a much deeper way. Not that Hashem says, I myself wrote it and gave it. I'm the author of the book. No, it doesn't mean that. Now, the Rebbe said what the Gemara means is not I myself wrote it and gave it. I wrote myself and gave myself, which means, the way Chassidus explains it, Hashem put himself, his essence into Torah. I wrote myself and I gave myself. That means Torah is one with, like we know, Torah and Hashem are all one. So Torah is one with Hashem, with the essence of Hashem. The same thing the Gemara says, the Medrash says, Tzadikim daimim lebayram. Tzadikim are like Hashem. That means when a tzaddik says Torah or Chassidic discourse or whatever, the Rebbe puts his essence into the discourse, just like Hashem puts his essence into the discourse. The tzaddik puts his essence into the discourse that he wrote. And the Rebbe Rashav, the Rebbe explained the stories as follows. A kiss is very external. I mean, today everybody kisses each other. They would stab you and kiss you at the same time, and it doesn't mean anything. It's not the essence of the person. It's a manifestation of the love, which is either real or not real. The Rebbe Rashav had a desire to give a kiss to the baby, but then he realized that's not my essence. It's an external show of love. So what did he do? He gave him an essential kiss. He wrote a Chassidic discourse, and he put his essence into the Chassidic discourse. He wasn't going to give it to him as a baby. What's he going to do with it? When he got older already, and the previous Rebbe was able to learn the discourses, so then the Rebbe Rashab gave him the Maimer, and he said, this is a Chassidic kiss. Ava itself, without the prerequisite of Yira, which is Bittul, could come to danger. It could be dangerous, because I love myself so much. So now I happen to love this. Later I'll love something else because it's more convenient for me. So now the Rebbe says, if somebody only serves Hashem with love, it's not like he says, it's not Eina Nikra B'Shem Avedus HaEved. You have to be an Eved. Hashem says, V'avadetem, you're an Eved. You have to have this bittul. So yes, it's important, but in order to come to real Ava, first you need the real Yira. Okay, we're going to leave it here. Once again, the class is sponsored by the Morviches in honor of the birth of the great-granddaughter, the first one. Mazel and Brach, only good things. And admit everybody should have a good Shabbos. Mitzvah Monday night, 8 will be the Parsha class.